The Second World War birthed hundreds of films, but not all survived the march of time. Some were buried, censored, or simply forgotten. Yet these lost treasures still carry the raw fire of danger, propaganda, and truth. What if the greatest WWII movies you've never seen are the ones history tried hardest to erase? Stay with me, because we're about to uncover them. Number 15. The Purple Heart, 1944. When The Purple Heart premiered in 1944, it was both hailed as patriotic and condemned as propaganda. Directed by Louis Milestone, the film dramatized the trial of downed American airmen captured by the Japanese after the Doolittle raid. Claustrophobic courtroom settings and harrowing speeches about honor and sacrifice gripped wartime audiences. At the time, it seemed too real, too painful to be just cinema. But controversy shadowed it. U.S. officials feared depictions of Japanese cruelty would inflame tensions and complicate diplomacy. Meanwhile, critics whispered it blurred the line between truth and invention. Some even accused it of stoking dangerous hatred rather than inspiring patriotism. In several Allied nations, censors trimmed scenes considered excessively brutal, while in occupied territories, the film was outright banned. Behind the scenes, the actors endured grueling hours to sustain the authenticity of captivity. Reports suggest Milestone intentionally withheld comforts on set to keep performances raw and ragged. The result? A film both powerful and punishing, too intense for re-release in later peacetime decades. Over time, The Purple Heart slipped into obscurity. Unlike the war epics that followed, it carried the bitterness of propaganda rather than the polish of classic Hollywood. Yet today, when seen again, it hits with a strange force, reminding us how close cinema can come to national propaganda and how thin the line between truth and manipulation can be. Number 14. They Were Expendable, 1945. Released just months after Japan's surrender, John Ford's They Were Expendable carried a chilling honesty that few wartime films dared attempt. Based on true accounts of U.S. Navy PT boat crews in the Philippines, it followed Robert Montgomery and John Wayne as they waged a hopeless fight against overwhelming odds. Critics praised its somber tone, more elegy than victory parade. But here's the twist. Audiences didn't want somber. They wanted celebration, relief, heroes who triumphed. Instead, Ford delivered a film about sacrifice, loss, and the inevitability of retreat. Some military officials quietly worried the bleak portrayal would demoralize families still reeling from casualty lists. Rumors circulated that Ford clashed with MGM executives who wanted more uplift and less despair. Ford refused. Production wasn't smooth either. John Wayne, who had not served in the war, bristled against co-star Robert Montgomery, a real-life Navy officer and PT boat commander. There, tension simmered off camera, reflecting the uneasy balance between Hollywood heroes and true veterans. Critics noticed, fueling debates about authenticity. Despite its artistry, They Were Expendable was quietly pushed aside in re-releases, overshadowed by more triumphant pictures. For decades, it gathered dust. And yet, when rediscovered, it plays like an anti-war poem, subdued, haunting, and far more honest than the flag-waving epics of its era. A film too real for its time and too bitter for its moment of release. Number 13. Decision Before Dawn, 1951. At first glance, Anatol Litvak's Decision Before Dawn seemed like just another post-war thriller. But look closer. It was something far riskier. Shot on location in ruined German cities in 1950, it dared to tell a story from the German side of the war. Even more provocative, its central characters were German POWs recruited by U.S. intelligence to spy on their own homeland. Imagine watching that in 1951. America had just fought the Germans, and already tensions with Russia were building. Here was a film asking audiences to empathize, even briefly, with the enemy. Some theaters hesitated to screen it. Whispers of pro-Nazi sympathies floated around. In parts of Europe, censors trimmed dialogue suggesting Germans were victims too. The film straddled a razor's edge of morality. Production itself was chaos. Hollywood crews wandered through bombed-out streets, dodging debris and filming among real ruins. Locals reportedly heckled actors portraying Nazis. The raw backdrop gave the film its startling authenticity, but also left audiences unsettled. Critics admired its courage, yet mainstream moviegoers avoided it, preferring simpler narratives of victory. Though it earned Academy Award nominations, Decision Before Dawn quickly disappeared from circulation. For decades, it remained a half-forgotten experiment in perspective. But when seen now, it feels eerily modern, reminding us that even the enemy were human, torn between loyalty and survival. A story too daring for 1951, but timeless today. Number 12. Attack, 1956. By the mid-1950s, America preferred its war films heroic and clear-cut. Robert Aldrich's Attack shattered that expectation. Brutal, cynical, and furious, it painted the U.S. Army not as paragons of valor, but as fractured, corrupt, and led by cowards. Jack Palance starred as a lieutenant betrayed by an incompetent commander, Eddie Albert, in a chilling turn. For audiences raised on John Wayne patriotism, it was a gut punch. The controversy was immediate. The Pentagon refused cooperation, branding it damaging to morale. Some theaters reportedly received quiet pressure not to book it. Critics were divided. Some hailed it as revolutionary. Others accused it of slandering America's soldiers. Whispers swirled that Aldrich, already labeled difficult, might have torpedoed his Hollywood standing by pushing too hard against patriotic myth. On set, tensions mirrored the story. Aldrich demanded unflinching realism, staging explosions dangerously close to actors and forcing Palance into punishing physical performances. Crew accounts suggest more than one hospital trip resulted. The intensity paid off on screen, but at the cost of safety. The aftermath? The film sank commercially, buried under patriotic epics like The Longest Day. Yet in later decades, as Vietnam shattered illusions of military honor, Attack resurfaced as prophetic. Today, it feels ahead of its time, a searing critique of power, cowardice, and the cost of blind obedience. Its legacy? Proof that even in the 50s, some filmmakers refused to play it safe. Number 11. The Young Lions, 1958. When The Young Lions premiered, it was billed as a bold, sweeping war drama with a star-studded cast. Marlon Brando, Montgomery Clift, and Dean Martin. On paper, it looked like a surefire classic. But what made it controversial was Brando's role. He played a German officer, presented not as a monster, but as a man wrestling with ideology and conscience. For 1958, America, this was unsettling. Based on Irwin Shaw's novel, the story followed three very different men through the war. A conflicted German, a Jewish American soldier facing prejudice within his own ranks, and a reluctant entertainer drafted into battle. The parallel narratives broke expectations of black and white morality. Critics at the time praised the ambition, but warned it blurred lines audiences preferred sharp. Behind the camera, clashes erupted. Brando, known for resisting authority, refused to play the German officer as a caricature. He softened the role, seeking sympathy for his character, and some studio executives feared this humanization would outrage post-war viewers. Meanwhile, Clift, struggling with personal demons, delivered a raw, painfully authentic performance that was as much about his own battles as his characters. Though commercially successful, the film's daring message caused quiet discomfort. Some theaters in Europe trimmed dialogue sympathetic to Germans. In the U.S., veterans groups criticized its depiction of anti-Semitism within American ranks, insisting the focus should remain on Nazi crimes. Over time, this tension pushed the film into the margins, overshadowed by more patriotic epics of the late 50s. Today, The Young Lions feels like a time bomb. It challenged narratives, asked audiences to face uncomfortable truths, and revealed cracks within both sides of the war. Forgotten by many, it now plays as a haunting portrait of humanity on both ends of the gun. Number 10. Hell is for Heroes, 1962. When Don Siegel's Hell is for Heroes hit theaters in 1962, it arrived as a stripped-down, gritty counterpoint to glossy war spectacles. Steve McQueen, still on the rise, starred as a bitter, reckless soldier whose anger made him both dangerous and indispensable. Unlike the noble heroes of typical war films, McQueen's character was flawed, broken, and far from glamorous. This wasn't the war Hollywood usually sold. The film's story followed a small, undermanned American squad tasked with holding off a much larger German force. Claustrophobic and tense, it avoided the sweeping vistas of The Longest Day or The Guns of Navarone. Instead, it trapped viewers in the mud and desperation of the front lines. For some audiences, this unromantic realism was too much. Controversy arose in part because the film was bleak, unrelentingly so. There was little glory, little triumph, and even less morale-boosting. Studio executives reportedly worried it was too grim to sell, especially as Cold War tensions called for strength in America's image. The Pentagon offered no support, leaving Siegel to rely on smaller budgets and inventive shooting to craft authenticity. Behind the scenes, McQueen clashed with producers, pushing for a performance that leaned into his character's nihilism. Some accounts suggest he even resisted traditional heroic beats, refusing to smile or soften his edges. Critics were split. Some admired the stripped-down honesty, while others dismissed it as cynical and un-American. The film faded quickly from theaters, overshadowed by bigger-budget productions. Yet in later years, it grew into a cult favorite, seen as a prototype for the gritty war realism that would dominate in later decades. Today, Hell is for Heroes feels like a window into Vietnam-era sensibilities before Vietnam even arrived, a war movie that warned us heroism is never simple. Number 9. King Rat, 1965. By the mid-1960s, Hollywood's war films were shifting, moving from patriotic triumphs to moral ambiguity. Brian Forbes's King Rat was among the most unsettling examples. Adapted from James Clavell's novel, it depicted life inside a Japanese POW camp in Singapore, not through grand battles, but through survival, corruption, and betrayal. George Siegel starred as an American prisoner who thrives by exploiting others, earning both admiration and hatred. The controversy. King Rat dared to suggest that the greatest enemy in captivity wasn't always the guards, it was fellow prisoners. That cynical twist unsettled both critics and audiences. In Britain, some reviewers accused the film of tarnishing the heroism of POWs. In America, veterans groups bristled at its suggestion of moral decay among soldiers. Japan, still wary of depictions of wartime cruelty, allowed only limited screenings. Production itself wasn't easy. Filming in actual jungle conditions pushed cast and crew to exhaustion. Reports claim Siegel deliberately lost weight to appear gaunt, adding to the authenticity. The oppressive atmosphere on screen mirrored the miserable conditions behind the camera. Despite strong performances, the film was quietly shelved after modest box office results. It didn't receive the same long life as the great Escape or Bridge on the River Kwai. Yet its daring honesty, its suggestion that survival could erode morality, was decades ahead of its time. Modern critics now regard it as one of the most haunting depictions of POW life ever filmed. Today, King Rat stands as a chilling reminder that war corrodes not only nations, but also the soul. A forgotten gem that dared to look inward, at the darkness men carry with them even when the guns go silent. Number 8. The Hill, 1965. Sidney Lumet's The Hill wasn't just another war movie. It was a psychological pressure cooker. Released in 1965, it didn't show soldiers in combat, but instead focused on a brutal British military prison in North Africa. Sean Connery, fresh off his fame as James Bond, shocked audiences by playing a rebellious soldier broken down under sadistic discipline. The film's weapon wasn't bullets, but humiliation, sweat, and cruelty. Audiences expecting Bond-style heroics were horrified. Connery was stripped, beaten down, and nearly destroyed in a role that demolished his suave image. Critics praised his bravery, but others questioned why he'd take such a punishing, unglamorous part. Even worse, the film's relentless brutality made it difficult to watch. Many theaters in America trimmed sequences they deemed excessive. British censors had their own concerns. The depiction of military officers as abusive tyrants angered establishment figures who accused the film of undermining national pride. Some newspapers openly condemned it, arguing it presented the British Army as sadists. Lumet defended his vision, insisting he was telling the truth about institutional cruelty. But the damage was done. Audiences largely stayed away. Behind the scenes, filming under sweltering desert sun took a real toll. Actors fainted, extras collapsed, and Connery reportedly considered quitting mid-shoot. Yet, Lumet's insistence on realism gave the film its searing power. Critics who revisited it decades later hailed it as one of Connery's greatest performances. The Hill never achieved the fame of more traditional war films, but its impact lingers. It forced audiences to confront the cruelty not of the battlefield, but of the systems meant to control soldiers. Forgotten by many, it's still one of the most searing examinations of authority and suffering in WWII cinema. Number 7. The Victors, 1963. Carl Foreman's The Victors was marketed as an epic, yet what audiences received was far darker and more unsettling than expected. Sprawling in scope, it followed Allied soldiers across Europe, not as triumphant heroes, but as weary men stumbling through love affairs, betrayals, and moments of profound moral ambiguity. The tagline declared, "There are no victors in war, only victims." That was its boldest statement, and its curse. The film included a sequence that shocked audiences into silence. American soldiers executing a deserter, played out with unflinching realism. For 1963, this was nearly unthinkable. Veterans groups condemned the scene. Newspapers debated its morality, and whispers circulated that some theaters refused to screen it unless cut. Even more provocative was a Christmas sequence set against Bing Crosby's "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas," juxtaposing holiday cheer with wartime brutality. Behind the camera, Foreman clashed with studios who feared the film was too anti-American, at a time when Cold War patriotism was at its height. Critics admired its bravery, but warned it was destined for box office failure. Audiences, expecting a rousing war saga, were instead given a slow, painful meditation on disillusionment. Unsurprisingly, The Victors sank. For decades, it was nearly impossible to find outside of late-night television screenings. And yet, its DNA can be felt in later works like Apocalypse Now and The Deer Hunter. By showing war as an endless chain of moral compromises, Foreman was decades ahead of his time. Today, rediscovered, The Victors feels prophetic. Too bleak for 1963, but hauntingly truthful now. Number 6. Fixed Bayonets, 1951. Though often overshadowed by Samuel Fuller's later classic, The Steel Helmet, his Fixed Bayonets remains one of the grittiest early Korean War films, and, interestingly, one of the last WWII-inspired pictures to sneak into theaters before the era fully shifted. Fuller, himself a combat veteran, directed with relentless energy, presenting soldiers not as icons, but as men terrified of failure, death, and responsibility. The story followed a platoon ordered to hold a snowy mountain pass, with a reluctant corporal suddenly thrust into command after his leaders fall one by one. The suspense wasn't in massive battles, but in the psychological torture of leadership. Who lives, who dies, and who makes the impossible calls. This stripped-down approach unsettled audiences who preferred larger-than-life epics. Censors and military advisors worried about its defeatist tones. Though set in Korea, its DNA came from Fuller's WWII experiences, and his refusal to romanticize command clashed with America's desire for post-war pride. Fuller's reputation for blunt honesty didn't help. Studios, uncomfortable with his raw style, pushed it out quickly with minimal promotion. Behind the scenes, the film's authenticity came at a price. Actors endured bitter cold on set, and Fuller famously demanded they stay in uniform for days to feel the exhaustion of real soldiers. Critics admired the intensity, but noted it was too small compared to grand MGM or Fox productions. And so, it faded into near obscurity. Revisited today, Fixed Bayonets resonates not as a patriotic march, but as a raw meditation on fear, duty, and survival. Forgotten by many, it is proof that sometimes the smallest stories carry the deepest truths. Number 5. Bitter Victory, 1957. Nicholas Ray's Bitter Victory was one of the most psychologically complex WWII films of its time, and one of the most divisive. Starring Richard Burton and Kurt Jurgens, it told the story of two officers sent on a dangerous mission in North Africa. One was brave but reckless, the other cautious but cowardly. Their rivalry escalated until the true battle wasn't with the Germans, but with each other. This wasn't the war film audiences wanted. Instead of glory, it offered pettiness. Instead of brotherhood, jealousy. Some critics were enthralled by its existential undertones, but others dismissed it as confusing and unpatriotic. Whispers circulated that the U.S. Army refused to endorse it because of its depiction of incompetent leadership. In France, where Ray was more admired, it found greater appreciation, but still faced controversy for its cynical tone. Production was chaotic. Ray, known for clashing with studios, often ignored script notes and encouraged Burton to improvise dialogue. Tensions between cast and crew mirrored the bitterness on screen. By the time the film reached theaters, the studio had lost confidence, marketing it poorly, and trimming scenes that gave it clarity. It barely made a dent commercially. For decades, Bitter Victory was remembered only by cinephiles and directors who admired Ray's daring. Jean-Luc Godard called it one of the greatest films of its decade. Yet mainstream audiences forgot it almost entirely. Today, seen in full, it feels startlingly modern, an anti-war fable about ego, cowardice, and the futility of command. Forgotten by the masses, but unforgettable once experienced. Number 4. Go for Broke, 1951. At first glance, Robert Pirosh's Go for Broke seemed like another patriotic war drama. But its subject matter was revolutionary. It told the story of the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, made up almost entirely of Japanese-American soldiers who fought valiantly in Europe, even as many of their families were confined in U.S. internment camps. In 1951, that was nothing short of explosive. The casting included real veterans of the 442nd, alongside Hollywood star Van Johnson. Their presence gave the film an authenticity rarely seen in studio war pictures. But controversy brewed immediately. Some audiences resisted sympathetic portrayals of Japanese Americans so soon after Pearl Harbor. Veterans groups clashed over whether the film was healing or too soon. Southern theaters in particular were reluctant to screen it, fearing backlash. Behind the scenes, Pirosh struggled with pressure to soften the message. Studios feared box office failure and reportedly pushed for more emphasis on Johnson's role over the Japanese-American cast. Yet, the veteran's presence grounded the film, even as Hollywood tried to dilute it. Critics were split. Some hailed it as a milestone in representation. Others dismissed it as propaganda. Despite strong reviews, the film underperformed financially. For decades, it lingered in the shadows of bigger, safer war epics. Only much later, when the 442nd's heroism was formally recognized, did Go for Broke resurface as a cultural landmark. Today, it stands as both a war film and a testament to resilience in the face of prejudice, a forgotten movie that was far ahead of its time. Number 3. The Cruel Sea, 1953. In Britain, Charles Friend's The Cruel Sea was hailed as a landmark naval drama. Based on Nicholas Monserrat's best-selling novel, it depicted the terrifying Battle of the Atlantic, not through glory, but through endless patrols, brutal seas, and the psychological strain of convoy duty. Jack Hawkins starred as the weary captain who must send men to their deaths and live with the unbearable weight of command. Unlike the usual battlefield spectacles, this film made the sea itself the enemy. Long stretches of silence, waiting, and tension created an almost unbearable realism. For many veterans, it was too close to home. Some praised its honesty, while others complained it reopened wounds still raw less than a decade after the war. Government officials debated whether the stark portrayal of Allied losses risked undermining morale in the Cold War era. Behind the scenes, production was grueling. Filming on the open sea subjected cast and crew to miserable conditions, seasickness, bitter cold, and dangerous stunts with real ships. Hawkins himself nearly drowned during a sequence involving a rescue. Yet that authenticity bled into the screen, creating one of the most harrowing naval films of its generation. Though critically acclaimed in the UK, it was overshadowed internationally by bigger Hollywood spectacles like the Caine Mutiny. For decades, it remained a British classic, but a global afterthought. Today, revisiting The Cruel Sea feels like rediscovering a hidden chapter of realism in war cinema. Too grim for mass audiences of the 50s, but astonishingly modern in its unflinching honesty. Number 2. The Burmese Harp, 1956. Few films on this list shocked audiences with their quietness, like Konichikawa's The Burmese Harp. This Japanese masterpiece followed a soldier who, instead of returning home after Japan's surrender, chooses to stay in Burma and bury the war dead. Rather than celebrate triumph or glorify sacrifice, it presented war as spiritual tragedy. For 1956, this was radical. The controversy was immediate. Japan, still grappling with defeat, was divided over whether the film was an act of mourning or an indictment of the war itself. Some nationalists condemned it as defeatist, even dangerous. In Western countries, distributors hesitated, fearing audiences would reject a sympathetic Japanese protagonist. In some regions, entire sequences were cut, leaving only fragments of the original message. Behind the camera, Ichikawa crafted his film with a meditative style more akin to poetry than war. Long stretches of silence, punctuated by the haunting sound of a harp, forced viewers to sit with grief rather than action. The cast, many of them non-professional actors, endured grueling conditions in Burma to capture authenticity. The result was both haunting and unforgettable. Despite international acclaim and an Academy Award nomination, The Burmese Harp remained underseen outside art house circles. Hollywood distributors quietly shelved it in favor of more conventional narratives. But over time, its legacy grew. Today, it stands as one of the most moving anti-war films ever made, showing that sometimes the most powerful statement is not battle, but silence. Number 1. Fires on the Plain, 1959. If one film on this list truly vanished into shadows, yet deserves resurrection, it is Ichikawa's other masterpiece, Fires on the Plain. Brutal, raw, and unflinching, it depicted the final days of Japanese soldiers stranded in the Philippines, starving, diseased, and utterly abandoned. Unlike heroic war dramas, this film presented nothing but despair. Soldiers scavenged, hallucinated, and lost their humanity in the slow grind of defeat. The reaction was explosive. Japanese critics were divided. Some hailed it as a necessary confrontation with wartime truth, while others decried it as obscene. Internationally, censors balked. In the U.S., several distributors refused to release it, citing unmarketable pessimism. Rumors spread that certain countries banned it outright for scenes of disturbing survival, scenes that audiences whispered about for years. Behind the camera, production was nearly as punishing as the film itself. Actors lost drastic amounts of weight to play starving soldiers. Ichikawa insisted on filming in harsh conditions to strip away any sense of artifice. Crew members described the set as living inside a nightmare, where fiction and reality blurred. The result was a film so uncompromising that many theaters refused to carry it. Commercially, it failed. But artistically, it was groundbreaking. Over decades, critics elevated it to one of the greatest anti-war films ever made. Today, it resonates as a brutal reminder of what happens when war drains men of everything but the will to survive. Forgotten by many mainstream audiences, Fires on the Plain is the war film too devastating to celebrate and too important to ignore. From propaganda thrillers to meditative anti-war masterpieces, these forgotten films reveal sides of WWII cinema we were never meant to remember. Some were banned, others buried, many simply ignored. But each one carries a truth still relevant today. Which of these lost classics shocked you the most? Like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments. Your story begins here.